Have you ever thought that you could get a brand new smartphone for around £50? Well, this is the Xiaomi Redmi A5. It is an ultra-budget smartphone that often goes on sale for around that £50 price point. It is running Android Go, which is basically a cut-down version of Android, which is optimized to run on lower-end hardware. But it does promise that higher-end Android experience without cutting too many corners. So in today's review, we're going to find out whether this is the ultra-budget king, or whether it's just destined for landfill. Let's start off by talking about design and build quality. I have the black model here, and actually I do quite like how it looks, especially with the gold accents around the cameras on the back here. It manages to give the whole phone a pretty modern feel without it being too out there with its design. Of course, it is an all-plastic frame, but it does feel pretty sturdy in the hand, especially for that lower-end price point. I did find that it tended to cut into my hand a little, mainly because it had quite sharp edges, whereas many more premium devices have more chamfered edges, meaning that it sits slightly nicer in your palm. It does carry an IP53 dust and splash resistance, which is more than some budget phones will give you. It's relatively slim too, at 8.3mm, though it is a little bit of a chonky boy, coming in at around 193 grams or 198, depending on the model that you choose. The majority of that weight is down to its massive battery and even bigger screen. So let's talk about that. Looking around the phone, there really isn't that much to write home about. You've obviously got the volume rocker and the power button, which is also a fingerprint sensor. It works relatively well and is pretty quick. Personally, I'm not a massive fan of this style of button layout because I tend to press the volume down instead of turning the phone on and off and vice versa. Overall, the buttons are pretty unpleasant to use. They feel pretty mushy and just generally aren't machined particularly well into the body. Thankfully, though, it does have AI face unlock, so you don't have to press those buttons too much if you don't want to. I think one of the most important features when looking around this phone is the 3.5mm headphone jack. Especially when we're talking ultra-budget phones here, it's normally the case that if you're buying an ultra-budget phone, you don't have the funds or the desire to have wireless headphones. So that 3.5mm headphone jack is genuinely a lifesaver. There is a top-firing loudspeaker for all of your media needs. This isn't stereo, and I do find it a little odd choosing to put the speaker at the top of the device. Usually you'd find this at the bottom alongside the headphone jack and the charging port. The Redmi A5 does support dual SIM, as well as micro SD card expansion up to 1TB. So you can quickly swap SIMs whenever you're traveling or drug dealing. And you've also got enough space to be able to expand and hold all of your media. I think it will come as no surprise to anyone that there is no eSIM support here. I am kind of looking forward to when these lower end devices start to receive eSIM. I genuinely think it is the future. It's just so easy to set up and transfer. And when I'm traveling as well with apps like Saily, it's really easy to be able to get the kind of data that I need when I'm abroad. The phone comes in a few different colours. The black version that I've got here, ocean blue, lake green, and sandy gold. Before we continue with this review though, I do just want to say that if this is the first time that you're seeing my face on your screen, then one, lucky you. And two, go down there, hit that subscribe button, smash that notification bell, so you get notified every time I upload. I've got a ton more of these budget smartphone reviews coming because I know it's something that you guys love, and honestly, I kinda love doing them. Anyway, let's talk about the biggest feature on this phone, the screen. I personally believe that the screen is both the best and the worst feature of the A5. On the plus side, it is absolutely enormous, coming in at 6.88 inches. Making it perfect for scrolling social media, or maybe even doing something like watching YouTube videos. Or, if you're like me and visually impaired, that big screen is a big plus. Sadly, it is an IPS panel, which means that you're not going to get great colours. It looks pretty washed out at times, and you get a ton of screen bleed. When you're looking at it from the side, you've basically got no vision whatsoever. The resolution is 1640 by 720. And it has a max peak brightness of 450 nits. I think this is where you're really going to start to feel that lower end price point on these devices. It is a nice screen, but it is definitely not the best I've seen by a long shot. For media consumption and everyday use, that absolutely enormous screen is actually pretty immersive. The smooth 120Hz scrolling is passable as well, but remember, you're really only going to see that 120Hz when scrolling through a web page or perhaps a social media feed. You're not going to be seeing that kind of power in gaming, which we'll talk about shortly. And keep in mind too, this is a big display for having just a 720p resolution. You can absolutely pixel peep here. It is not the sharpest display on the market. For watching YouTube, TikTok, or scrolling Instagram, it's absolutely passable. But if you really do care about your visuals, then you're going to want to look elsewhere. Next up, let's talk about internals and what exactly is powering this phone. The Redmi A5 is powered by the Unisoc T7250. It's an octa-core processor on the 12nm chip. Though there are 8 cores here, they are only clocked at 1.8 GHz. This is definitely not a fast chip, but you shouldn't expect it for that ultra-low budget price point. It means that for basic tasks like texting, calling, or surfing the web, it feels nice and fast, and I would even say snappy at points. This is thanks in part to the Android Go operating system, which we'll talk about later. It is so slimline compared to the main Android builds that it really does help with these lower end chips. However, if you're planning on doing any kind of heavy multitasking or even gaming, this phone will trip up pretty quick. The model I'm reviewing here has just 3 GB of RAM. There are other variants available that have more RAM, and I will always recommend that you choose that model. Especially on the lower end, the more RAM you have, the better experience overall you're going to have. You do get 64 GB of internal storage by default, especially here in the UK, but rather annoyingly, around 10 to 15 GB of that is actually used up by the system. So you don't have that much space to actually use when it comes to saving media and photos that you've taken. I do strongly believe that even the more casual users will use up that 50 GB left of space pretty quickly, so a microSD card is almost a must. One of the key performance advantages of the Redmi A5 is its software. As I've mentioned, it's running Android Go, a cut-down version of Android built specifically for these kinds of devices. Out of the box, it's Android 13, but there are promised updates up until Android 15. It typically uses a lot less memory and uses the Go versions of many popular apps, including Facebook, as well as Google. It means that your day-to-day use is going to feel snappy without feeling too bogged down by a load of unnecessary apps and bloat. Sadly, being a cut-down version of Android, you are losing out on some of the games and apps that you might want to use. For example, the latest Asphalt game just isn't available for Android Go, just yet. And you'll find that with many of the games in this section. It is nice to see that Xiaomi's interface here is pretty minimal, meaning that you're going to get a pretty stock Android experience out of the box. Of course, when it comes to the rest of the hardware, there is no 5G support here. It's only a 4G phone. You're also missing out on NFC, meaning that you can't use Google Wallet. You do at least get Wi-Fi 5 and Bluetooth 5.2. So when it comes to connecting to your home Wi-Fi and all your Bluetooth accessories, it's pretty solid. Overall, I'd say keep your expectations in check. Understand that this is a phone that is under £100. If you don't expect it to be an absolute gaming powerhouse, then I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by its performance. Xiaomi is only offering up to 3 years of software updates, which I think should tell you everything that you need to know about the phone. In 3 years' time, you should expect to have to upgrade because this thing will have just slowed down to an absolute snail's pace. Let's really quickly talk about battery though, because that's when the majority of the weight comes in for this device. It's absolutely enormous, coming in at 5,200 mAh. Combine this with the 720p screen and the much lower end chipset, and you get absolutely interstellar battery life. Honestly, I was getting a day and a half, maybe even 2 days worth of battery out of pretty extensive use. Sadly though, charging this big of a battery is a pretty slow and cumbersome process. It supports a maximum of 15-watt charging, which is not fast by today's standards. That actually means that to get a full charge, you'll be waiting over 2.5 hours. This isn't a quick top-up and go style device. Finally, then, let's talk about cameras. So on the back, you do see 2 cameras, though realistically, you're only going to be using one of these. It's a 32 megapixel sensor whereas the one underneath is much lower resolution and really is only used by the system to help with bokeh effects. There's no ultra-wide, there's no macro lenses, so you've just got the one to work with. It does have an f-stop of 2, which means that you're going to get a pretty nice blur in the background. In good lighting, I was pleasantly surprised by the quality of the images coming out of this camera, especially with the device overall costing around £50. Colours are okay, though sometimes they feel a little bit muted. On top of that, the dynamic range is pretty limited too. There is a low light mode here, but you really shouldn't expect much from it. All of the images that I saw were grainy and pretty soft. Really, it's more for emergencies than it is Instagram-worthy night shots. You will also notice a few performance issues here too. Sometimes when I was taking a photo, it was taking between 5 and 7 seconds to process it. You can't take lots and lots of pictures very quickly, sadly. Video capture is limited to 1080p at 30 frames a second. Though honestly, I wouldn't use this phone for video, it's pretty atrocious. For selfies, up front you've got an 8 megapixel camera, which uses its beauty mode pretty heavily to try and soften out the image and make it look acceptable. It's fine for your video calls and your casual selfies, but don't expect big things. So, in conclusion then, who is the A5 realistically for? Clearly not for a tech head like me, right? But perhaps if this is for your child and it's their first phone, or somebody elderly in the family and you're just wanting to get them into the world of smartphones and they don't need the earth, this is a surprisingly solid option. It's got a nice big screen, pretty good cameras, and enough performance to get you through most daily tasks. And that battery life is definitely a winner, especially for that £50 price point. However, if you are looking to save a few more quid, you might be able to get a much better device in terms of performance and cameras. And if you get subscribed now, we're going to talk about a few of those devices in the coming weeks. Anyway guys, why don't you let me know what you think of the A5 in the comments section down below. And of course, while you're down there, get subscribed and share this with your friends and family because it genuinely does mean the world to me. Anyway, my name has been Robert. This has been Bite Sized Clue and I will catch you in the next one. Adios.